The day my grandmother's will was read, there were 11 people sitting in that lawyer's office, aunts, uncles, cousins, all dressed in black, all expecting something. The estate was worth $2.30 million. A house in Savannah, Georgia. A vacation property in Lake Tahoe, investment accounts, jewelry, art, antiques. My grandmother, Eleanor May Whitfield, had spent 84 years building something remarkable, and every single person in that room believed they were about to receive their share. The lawyer, Mr. Douglas Hartman, opened the folder. He cleared his throat, he began to read, and within 4 minutes, the room went completely silent. Then my Aunt Carolyn stood up so fast her chair fell backwards. My Uncle Richard said a word I will not repeat, and my Cousin Brittany burst into tears, and me, I sat completely still, hands folded in my lap, expression calm, because I already knew, had known for 3 years, and I had stayed silent every single day. Let me tell you everything, because this story starts long before that lawyer's office. It starts with a little girl, a grandmother, and a garden full of roses. My name is Vivian Clare Whitfield. And my grandmother Eleanor was the greatest person I have ever known. She was born in 1938 in a small town outside Savannah. She married my grandfather Howard at 19. They built their home together, literally, with their own hands and the help of neighbors, on 3 acres of land just outside the city. Howard died when I was 4 years old. I don't remember him well. But I remember Eleanor, every detail, every story, every lesson. She was a small woman, barely 5'2". Silver hair always pinned up. Hands that smelled like rose water and flour. She made biscuits every single morning of her life. She kept a garden that people would slow their cars to look at. She read 2 books a week until she was 81. She loved, genuinely, deeply loved, all 11 of her grandchildren. But she and I had something different, something the rest of the family never fully understood. When I was 7 years old, my parents went through a brutal divorce. My father, Charles Whitfield, Eleanor's son, was an alcoholic who became someone unrecognizable during those years. My mother Diane did her best, but she was working 2 jobs and barely holding things together. So for 3 years, from age 7 to 10, I lived with Eleanor, just me and her in that big house in Savannah. Those 3 years shaped everything I am. She taught me how to cook, how to balance a checkbook, how to write a letter by hand, how to listen more than I spoke. She told me stories about her life, her struggles, her losses, her quiet victories, with a honesty that most adults never offer children. She treated me like I was capable of understanding real things, and I loved her in the way you love someone who chose you when you felt completely unchosen. When I moved back with my mother at 10, Eleanor and I wrote letters to each other, actual handwritten letters, every single week. For 17 years, I still have every one. Now let me tell you about the rest of the family, because you need to understand who these people were before you can understand what happened in that lawyer's office. Eleanor had 3 children. Her oldest, my Uncle Richard, 61 years old. Richard was a commercial real estate developer in Atlanta. Successful, loud, and completely convinced that he was the head of the family simply because he was the oldest son. He visited Eleanor maybe 4 times a year. Usually around the holidays. Usually when he needed something. Her middle child, my Aunt Carolyn, 58 years old. Carolyn lived 40 minutes from Eleanor in Savannah and somehow managed to visit less than Richard. She had money, her husband Greg ran a medical supply company, but she was the kind of person who always found a reason why she couldn't come. And her youngest, my father Charles, 54 years old. The one who had struggled the most. After his divorce, after getting sober at 42, my father had rebuilt himself into someone decent. He visited Eleanor regularly. Not as often as he should have. But he tried. Then there were the grandchildren. 11 of us total. Richard's kids, Connor, Brittany, and Madison. All in their late 20s and early 30s. All living comfortable lives funded largely by Richard. None of them particularly close to Eleanor. Brittany in particular had a talent for showing up only when it benefited her. Carolyn's kids, Derek, Ashley, and Tanner. Derek was the oldest and had Eleanor's phone number saved as Grandma Money in his phone. I know this because I saw it once when he left his phone on her kitchen table. My father's kids, me, my brother Nathan, and my half-sister Paige from my father's second marriage. Nathan was kind but distant. Lived in Portland, Oregon and visited Eleanor once a year. Paige was 23, sweet, but had never developed a real relationship with Eleanor. And then me, Vivian, the one who wrote letters every week, the one who drove 4 hours from Columbia, South Carolina, where I worked as a high school English teacher, every single month to sit with Eleanor, the one who took her to doctor's appointments when Carolyn had plans, the one who sat with her through 2 surgeries, the one who learned her biscuit recipe and practiced it until mine tasted exactly like hers, the one she called at 11 p.m. sometimes just to talk, was not the richest grandchild, was not the most impressive by the family's standards. I was a teacher. I drove a 6-year-old Honda Civic. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, but I was there, I was always there, and Eleanor saw everything. 3 years before Eleanor passed, I drove up to Savannah for my regular monthly visit. It was a Saturday in October. The weather was perfect, that cool, golden Savannah fall that makes everything feel a little slower and softer. Eleanor met me at the door wearing her blue house dress and her reading glasses pushed up on her head. She hugged me the way she always did, both arms, full pressure, like she meant it. We made biscuits. We had coffee. We sat on her back porch and watched her garden for a while. Then she said, "Vivian, I need to talk to you about something important. And I need you to listen completely before you say anything." I put down my coffee cup. She reached into the pocket of her house dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She set it on the table between us. She said, "I have been working with Douglas Hartman for the past 8 months. My will is complete. And I want you to know what is in it before anyone else does." I looked at the paper. "I didn't touch it," she said. "Everything, Vivian. The house. The lake property. The accounts. The jewelry. Everything goes to you." I heard the words. I didn't fully understand them for a moment. I said, "Grandma," she held up her hand, "let me finish. I know what you're going to say. You're going to say it isn't fair to the others. You're going to say the family will be upset. You're going to try to talk me out of it." She was right. That was exactly what I was going to say. She leaned forward. "I have watched this family for 60 years, Vivian. I know exactly who shows up and who doesn't. I know who calls and who doesn't. I know who sat with me in that hospital room after my hip surgery and who sent flowers with a card." She picked up her coffee. "You have been here. Month after month, year after year, not because of what I have, because Lord knows a teacher's schedule doesn't make it easy, but because you love me. And I know the difference between love and interest. At 81 years old, I know it very well." I was crying by this point. Quietly, trying not to, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Now, I am not asking your permission. This is done. What I am asking is that you keep this between us until the time comes. I don't want my final years turned into a negotiation. I want to have my garden and my biscuits and my letters from you and my peace." I looked at her. I said, "How do I act normal around them?" She smiled. "The same way you always have, sweetheart." With grace, I nodded. I folded the paper back up. She put it in her pocket, and I kept that secret for 3 years. 3 years of Christmas dinners where Richard talked about what he planned to do with his share. 3 years of Carolyn mentioning casually that the lake property would need updating. 3 years of Brittany photographing Eleanor's antique jewelry collection and sending the photos to just a friend who knows values. 3 years of staying silent while I watched them calculate, and loving my grandmother through every single day of it. Her bedroom curtains. Gloria was there. I was holding her hand. She took one long slow breath. And then she was still. I sat with her for a long time before I called anyone. I wasn't ready to let the noise in yet. I just wanted a few more minutes of the quiet that she had always given me. The family descended on Savannah within 48 hours. 11 grandchildren. 3 children. Various spouses and partners. Eleanor's house, my house now, though no one knew it, was full of people I had seen maybe twice in the past 3 years. Everyone had opinions about the funeral arrangements. Everyone had items they wanted to hold on to for safekeeping. Richard pulled me aside the first evening and said, "Vivian, you've been here the most. Has she mentioned the estate at all? Did she update her will recently?" "Douglas Hartman won't return my calls." I said, "I wouldn't know, Richard. You'd have to ask Mr. Hartman." He looked at me for a long moment. "Right," he said. "Carolyn was going through Eleanor's kitchen when I found her on the second day, wrapping the antique china in dish towels." I said, "Carolyn, what are you doing?" She said, "Just making sure these are protected. They're quite valuable." I said, "Please put them back. Nothing should be moved until after the will is read." She looked at me like I had spoken out of turn. I held her gaze. She put the china back. Brittany had apparently already contacted an antique dealer about Eleanor's jewelry. I found this out from my cousin Ashley, who had overheard a phone call. Derek was photographing the lake property on his phone and sending photos to someone. I didn't ask who. Connor and Tanner were having a conversation on the back porch about what the Savannah property would sell for in the current market. I heard them through the screen door. I moved through all of it quietly. I made coffee. I accepted condolences. I thanked people for coming. I did not say one word about what I knew. The will reading was scheduled for the following Tuesday. 6 days away. I counted every one. Tuesday morning. Hartman and Associates Law Office. Downtown Savannah. Dark wood paneling. Leather chairs. The smell of old paper and central air conditioning. 11 grandchildren. 3 children. Several spouses. We barely fit in the conference room. I sat in the back corner. I wore a simple black dress. Eleanor's small pearl earrings, she had given them to me 2 years earlier, a birthday gift, nothing to do with the estate. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked at the table. Mr. Douglas Hartman, 60 years old, silver-haired, very calm, sat at the head of the room. He opened his folder. He said, "Thank you all for being here. Eleanor May Whitfield executed her final will and testament 14 months ago. I will now read the document in full." Richard was sitting up very straight. Carolyn had her hands clasped tight on the table. Brittany was already holding a tissue. Mr. Hartman began with the smaller provisions. $10,000 to Gloria, Eleanor's home care nurse. $5,000 to Savannah's First Baptist Church, where Eleanor had attended for 60 years. Her book collection to the Savannah Public Library. Her garden tools and seed collection to her neighbor Mrs. Dorothy Crane, who had always admired the roses. People were listening politely. Waiting. Then Mr. Hartman said, "The remainder of the estate, including the primary residence at 412 Whitfield Lane, Savannah, Georgia, the vacation property at Lake Tahoe, all investment accounts, all remaining personal property including furniture, artwork, and jewelry, is bequeathed in its entirety to my granddaughter Vivian Claire Whitfield." He looked up. The room was silent for exactly 4 seconds. Then Carolyn said, "I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?" Mr. Hartman said, "The entire estate is left to Vivian Whitfield." Richard stood up. "That is absolutely not. There must be an error. There must be a previous version." Mr. Hartman said, calmly, without raising his voice, "There is no error. Mrs. Whitfield was of sound mind and full legal capacity at the time of execution. This document has been reviewed and verified. There are no grounds for contest." Carolyn turned to me. Her face was something I had never seen before. She said, "Vivian, did you know about this?" The entire room looked at me. 11 pairs of eyes. I met every single one. Then I said, "Eleanor told me what she wanted. I respected her wishes then. I'm asking you to do the same now." The room erupted. What followed was 3 weeks of the most intense family pressure I have ever experienced. Richard hired his own attorney to contest the will. His attorney reviewed everything and told him, as Mr. Hartman had, that there were no grounds. Eleanor had been mentally competent. The will was clean. The case was unwinnable. He dropped the contest after 12 days. Carolyn called me 14 times in the first week. The first calls were angry. Then pleading. Then bargaining. Vivian, we could split the lake property, that seems fair, Eleanor would have wanted. Eleanor had left explicit written instructions with Mr. Hartman about exactly this possibility. A letter, in her own handwriting, addressed to the family, explaining her decision. Mr. Hartman sent it to all 3 of her children. I have never read that letter. Eleanor wrote it privately. But whatever it said, Carolyn stopped calling after it arrived. Brittany sent me a long emotional text about how unfair the situation was. I read it. I didn't respond. Derek posted something vague on social media about family betrayal that everyone understood immediately. He deleted it 3 days later. Connor and Tanner were actually the quietest. Connor sent me a short text that said, I don't agree with it. But it was her choice. I'm sorry for your loss, Vivian. That meant something to me. My brother Nathan called from Portland. He said, Viv. Did you know? I said, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, good. You were there. You earned it. I mean that. Nathan was always the most honest person in our family. My father Charles said almost nothing about the money. He came to the house the week after the reading, just him and me, and we sat on Eleanor's back porch. He said, she loved you most, you know. Not in the way that diminishes the rest of us. Just, you spoke her language. You always did. I held on to that for a long time. As for me, I did not sell the Savannah house. I moved in. I want to tell you what I did with what Eleanor left me. Because I think it matters. The lake property in Lake Tahoe, I kept it for 1 year. Then I sold it. Not because I needed the money. But because Eleanor had not been there in 6 years and I knew she would want the money to do something meaningful rather than sit in a property no one used. With part of the proceeds I established the Eleanor May Whitfield Literacy Fund, a small scholarship for first-generation college students in Savannah who wanted to study education. 3 students received it in the first year. I attended the award ceremony. I sat in the back and watched those 3 young people accept their awards, and I thought about Eleanor reading 2 books a week until she was 81, and I knew she would have loved every second of it. I returned to teaching, not in Columbia, but at a high school in Savannah, 10 minutes from the house. I kept the garden. I learned which roses Eleanor had planted in which year. I found her garden journal, 40 years of entries, every planting, every season, every note. I follow it still. Every Saturday morning I am in that garden. And every now and then a car slows down on the street to look at the roses. And I think, yes. That's right. Look. She built something beautiful here. And I will not let it disappear. About a year after Eleanor passed, I received a letter. A handwritten letter. From Carolyn. It was 2 pages long. I will not share everything she wrote because some things are private. But she said, and I believe she meant it, that Eleanor's letter had made her understand things about herself that she had been avoiding for a long time. She said she was sorry. Not for contesting the will, she didn't contest it. But for the years of absence. For choosing convenience over presence. For assuming love required no maintenance. She said, I think Eleanor knew that teaching us through her death was the only way we would learn what we refused to learn during her life. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I wrote Carolyn back. A handwritten letter. 4 pages. Because that is what Eleanor taught me. You write back. You always write back. Richard never contacted me. That door may be permanently closed and I have made my peace with it. Brittany sent a Christmas card that first year. Just her name signed at the bottom. But she sent it. I sent one back. We are not close. We may never be. But the door is not locked. Last October I was in Eleanor's garden on a Saturday morning. The roses were at their absolute best, deep red, pale pink, ivory white, exactly as she had planted them. I found a letter in her garden journal that I had not seen before. Tucked into the back cover. Sealed with a small sticker. My name on the front. In her handwriting. I sat down on her garden bench. I opened it. It was short. Just one paragraph. She wrote. Vivian. If you are reading this, you are sitting in my garden on a Saturday, which means you kept your promise, and that means I chose right. You were never the loudest, or the most impressive, or the most successful by the world's measuring. But you were present. And presence is the only currency that actually matters in a life. Everything I have is yours because everything you gave me was real. Take care of the roses. Take care of yourself. And write your letters. Always write your letters. All my love, Eleanor. I folded it carefully. I put it in my pocket. I picked up my garden gloves. And I went back to work. Because that is what she taught me. You show up. You do the work. You stay. And in the end, the ones who stay are the ones who were always supposed to be there.